the transition to
the confidence yet.
Are there any certifications?
And then the interpersonal skill. Really pay attention to the person.
So can you share some instances of interviews which...
It's a bit of a red flag.
Hey, hi Ron, how are you doing?
I'm good, Asif. How are you?
Nice to see you and always good to catch up with you.
Yeah, same here. Congrats on everything you're doing. Really love how you're helping the world with finance.
Thank you so much. So as you know, I'm interviewing a bunch of people, experts like you in finance for my book, which is Accounting to FP&A, which will come out sometime next month. And the idea is not to just have my inputs and inputs of my friends, close folks, but also to reach out to experts like you from different parts of the world to see that how it is different across different cultures, different geographies, and bring that into the book as well.
Yeah, I love that.
Awesome. So let's get into the questions. The first one that we have is on the transition to FP&A roles. So in your experience from the people you've trained so far, what is the biggest challenge or what are some of the biggest challenges people face from transitioning from a compliance accounting sort of a role to a more commercial FP&A role?
So maybe I'll talk about my experience first, right? So my first job was at Hitachi. I was a revenue accountant. I was doing accounting tasks, very important, debits, credits, journal entries, things like that. And it was very much black or white, right? Like you knew your task, you knew what day of the month you were doing it, and it was essentially the same repeat every month, right? I then joined Kraft and I was still in corporate accounting and I was working on overhead costs. And it was pretty, again, very standard. I knew what I was doing every month. And then I got promoted into a role on our category finance team as an FP&A analyst. And within a couple of weeks, I was working with marketing and sales and I was in a meeting with the president of the company. Mm-hmm. So I'd say the biggest challenge I encountered was I didn't have the confidence yet in terms of being able to sit at the table with marketing, sales, and if we got a question from the president, be comfortable answering it. So I'd say my transition was very quick. Mm-hmm. And what I would do in hindsight is I would try and learn a lot more about the business as I went through those corporate roles. And I would also work on my soft skills a lot more because a lot of you then end up spending a lot more time in meetings with cross-functional stakeholders. That's what my experience. Mm-hmm. And you have to become comfortable, right? And it's not about like, hey, from day one, day two, you can get comfortable. So I would say I really struggled in my first FP&A role because I didn't have those two skill sets, right? So like, I've got to think on the fly. I've got to sit around a virtual or real table and, hey, what do you think of this pricing? What do you think? And the other thing is no 2 days in FP&A are the same, right? You can have a plan, but it's going to go a different way, almost guaranteed, right? So those are some of the things that I encountered.
What are some skills that you think could be helpful to build to overcome these challenges? So any particular skills that you would like to share that you built along your career that helped you transition from all the challenges that you mentioned?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing is curiosity and the ability to ask really good questions, right? So my recommendation to any job transition, but even for FP&A in particular, is when you start, use those first few weeks as a chance to interview your stakeholders to learn the business, right? So go in, ask the questions, study the P&Ls, really become a student. And if your product's a physical product, so I worked in the food industry, go to the grocery store, go to the retailers, go do your work much, in a much more 360-degree view, right? To say, I want to see the whole business and not just jump into my budget forecast analysis. Like, so taking that time, I honestly see it as an investment that has a massive ROI. Okay. So that's one, really understanding the business. The other one is soft skills. Like that's one where I grew up in Kenya. I moved to Canada. I really struggled when I first started. Join a Toastmasters club, join a public speaking club. Much as that's very uncomfortable for people, like I'm introverted naturally. Yeah. That daily practice of learning to deal with different people, learning how to have a challenging conversation. That's a learned skill. There's lots of books you can read about that. So those skills become so much more important in FP&A. So those are two things. So really be curious, learn in different ways.
So being curious and learning the business and practicing your soft skills are the two things. If I ask you, what are some of the certifications people take to build these skills? Are there any certifications that you have taken or you have seen other people take successfully and do well? So we are looking for some guide on what certifications people can do to build the skills.
Yeah, no. So I think in terms of, formal certifications to me are always helpful. Like, so I took my CMA at the time. It's now part of the CPA program. And that was very focused on management accounting. So we did lots of cases, even on, the professional program, we broke into groups, we had to present back. So there's a really good practical component of it. And that's where, for me, the practical element of any certification is what's important. So for me, my CMA was very important because I did that. I mean, there's also, we're in a new world, right? So I know you have an FP&A course. I have an FP&A course. There's AFP, there's Larissa Melnichuk has her program. So find your different tools and find what works for you is my advice to anyone who's joining FP&A. So, for example, you have a number of years in FP&A. I do too, right? So I always believe find people in courses that are going to help you cross those bridges much faster, right? But it also has to be very, very practical. And then, reality is the best way to learn a job is on the job, right? These are all supplement to a great job where you get like 80% of your learning is actually on the job.
So there are some formal certifications that people can take, and then there are some certifications or online programs that can help them get to their outcome faster, which they can use. But on the job learning is going to be the main thing. And these all certifications and courses can supplement that.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just tell one story on that. So when I first joined FP&A at Kraft, they used price volume mix analysis. Mm-hmm. In my previous experience in accountant, I only worked on absolute variances. I had no idea what they were talking about. It was like a different language. Mm-hmm. And where I learned it was I went in on the weekend. I remember I went in and I literally calculated these by hand. And I started saying, what is a volume variance? What is a price variance? How do I calculate mix? And sometimes we get trapped into the system just spits it out for you. Once I said, I want to understand how to calculate it, it's almost like studying. Again, the curiosity, it became second nature. And then it became a wonderful way to explain a business. So I went from completely, I don't understand, to, okay, now I got to spend the time. So again, you can use that type of learning in online courses that maybe you have, or Christian has, or some of these experts, or you can actually do it yourself, right? And I like to say, what's that mix of the two that you can.
Thanks for sharing that. Now we move to the second part, which is more on the interview preparation. So somebody who's now working in accounting and compliance roles, how can they bring out their skills in their resume and interviews? Because when they go for an interview, the first thing that the recruiter would check is for experience, which they will not have direct experience of FP&A. So how can they overcome that? Have you had any experience with your students, your mentors, mentees?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, again, a lot of my experiences is internally within companies, internal or external interviews, we would hire accounting folks into potential FP&A roles, right? And what I always used to look for, is, okay, has the person done the research on the role? Do they really understand it? And so when they come in, are they coming in it with that almost that FP&A mentality? Hey, I want to have more of an impact on the business. I really want to work with cross-functional stakeholders. So when it was an external person, I would always, be very curious to know what they know about the company. So just have they done that preparation, right? And then the other thing that becomes very interesting in FP&A is being able to play in the gray, is what I call it, right? It's not black and white, right? So for example, if inventory obsolescence, okay, can I see both sides of it, right? Whereas, okay, clearly there's an accounting policy, but what's the best thing for the business where you're still adhering to it, right? Which is a very fine line there that an FP&A individual can play, right? So back to the question is, do they have adaptability? Are they flexible? I look for those type of scenarios, because what I found is people who have failed at FP&A in my experience are the ones who have not been able to be adaptable. They're like, here, it's black and white. And what they do is they have that approach with the cross-functional stakeholders, and in marketing, sales, and operations, they stop talking to them. They're like, I'm only going to invite that person to the meeting when as opposed to, no, I want to, because they're an indispensable partner who's trying to look at it from all sides. So I really try to see that flexibility. And then the interpersonal skill, like, is this person going to be able to interact comfortably with sales, marketing, operations, is something I look at, or do they have the potential to grow in that area?
Got it. So what I picked up is adaptability and interpersonal skills are the skills that you look for. Now, if I have to ask you, and now I know we've discussed this in the past about your process of preparing for an interview, the 3P process, I think we could probably do a quick refresher of that, and other pointers that you may want to share. So how do people should prepare for FP&A interviews? Is there a process? Is the 3P process applicable here, or would you recommend something else?
Yeah, I think for me, like having gone through this many times, it doesn't have to be that complicated. The first thing is, has the person done the research, right? Prepare is kind of maybe the first
Yeah.
P there. And it's like, when I say research, it's not just like go to the website and have a quick cursory look. It's, have they actually looked at the products? Have they really looked at the philosophy of the company? Have they really dived deep to say, this is a company I really want to work for, and why, right? And I'm always surprised that many people, because they're interviewing to so many companies, they just miss that basic preparation, right? I would, a simple question I would ask at Kraft or Campbell's or Kruger, hey, what's your favorite product? And many people wouldn't even be able to tell me what their favorite product is. Or do you know your brand? Many people wouldn't know, right? They'd almost come in with that, unprepared approach. So I'd say, that basic preparation, and then study the person's LinkedIn profile. Say, what, if you were interviewing me, I would have studied your profile, known all your companies you work for, known even the interest at the bottom. Like, hey, are you following Warren Buffett or Bill Gates or somebody like that? And say, okay, let me make sure I've done the work ahead of time. And even the basic questions, tell me what's your weakness or strength, like all these type of things to say, have you done the prep, right? So prepare, practice. And then, the last one's around performing, right? When you get to the meeting, be early, greet everybody, make eye contact, all these little things make a big difference. And I'm always surprised. And then the last thing is, I always say, ask good questions. Because whenever I have somebody who comes in, oh no, I don't have any questions, I'm like, okay, it's a bit of a red flag. So I say, have the person ask good, intelligent questions. And that's, again, all these things are easy to do, but you got to invest the time to do it.
Yeah. So prepare, practice, and then apply.
Perform in the meeting. And it's funny, a lot of people come to me and say, hey, can you give me a mock interview? I'm like, yeah. So go to somebody, go to a friend, go to another FP&A leader and say, hey, give me some advice. What questions do you think I could get? And so that work that you can do ahead of time. So when you get a question like, hey, what's your weakness? You can turn that into a strength, right? Hey, I used to be very shy and I was very uncomfortable presenting to stakeholders, but I've worked on it and I'm better and I'm still learning. Like, you turn it into that, as opposed to, some people say, I'm bad managing time. Okay, that's not helpful, right? So I think it's all that work ahead of time has a huge impact on whether you get it or not.
So thanks for that refresher. Reminded me of the conversation we had last year. So if anybody watching this want to see the detailed, I think it's a 30-minute conversation we had on the 3Ps, you can find the link. So we'll post that as well. Thanks for that. Now, moving to talking about some interview experiences. So we want to make sure that people understand how the interviews go and they prepare for it. Looking at some examples from the book. So can you share some instances of interviews which you have taken which were very good, and some examples which were not so good, so that people can relate? Okay, these are some things we should be doing. Diving deep into the third part, which is applying the third P of the framework.
Yeah, and I think there's some science on this, which I don't have at my fingertips, which is, a person will generally make their mind up very quickly into the interview.
Yes.
Right. And also there's a famous Amy Cuddy TED Talk, which talks about body language. So interestingly enough, we're very complex beings. And I think we make a lot of decisions with our gut. Right. So me personally, when I have an interview, I really pay attention to the person's body language and their enthusiasm, their energy. Even on a Zoom call, I can pick that up really clearly. Right. To say, like, for example, if I'm talking to you and I see you drifting off and looking at some other screen and things like that, okay, right away, I'm like, okay, this person's not really committed to it. So I'd say the first thing is, the people who I generally consider, not necessarily say yes to, are the ones who are fully present and come in and they're kind of got this confidence but not arrogance. So they've done the work, they're prepared, and they're also really good listeners. So I'm one of those things. I have my set questions. The answers are important. So there's there's certain answers I'm like, if they say this, I'm not gonna. If they say I'm not good managing time, or I'm always late to meetings, silly stuff like that, okay, those are red flags. But generally it will be, are they fully there, and are they answering thoughtfully deep questions, and are they asking me great follow-up questions, right? And I know I've made lots of hiring decisions based on that, right? Not necessarily the specific word for word answers. So it's that intangible that people often miss.
Yes. And so you mentioned about the body language and displaying that enthusiasm. Listening skills is also important, and curiosity. So how can now that most of the interviews happen virtually, how can people demonstrate those skills or those traits in a Zoom? Because we are talking through camera, right? I'm looking at him and you might feel like I'm looking at you, but I might be looking at the screen and you may not, you may feel like I'm looking elsewhere, but I'm still looking at you.
Yeah, and I think in that case, I think what's really important is being a good communicator. So, for example, if you came on to this interview, let's say this is an interview, and you say, "Hey, Ron, by the way, I have my notes on the side, so I'll periodically be looking at that, and my camera's here." I'm like, "Okay, cool, right?" And I've had people, "Hey, by the way, I'm actually taking notes here. I'm not multitasking." And even just that act of telling the person, "Okay, I got it," right? And so even the intricacies of the Zoom, okay, yeah, just tell the person, and that's all you need to do, right? Whereas most people won't say anything, and then the other person's like, okay, are they really committed to this interview, or are they looking at some Instagram post or TikTok or something like that, right? Like that's the interesting thing. And then basic stuff like your background's a nice background. Like I like the background there. I've got a nice background with books, or put a good virtual background if you're sitting in a bedroom like I was before. Just put a good virtual office. So even those little things matter a lot in the interview.
Okay, thanks for that. Now I think this is the last question, and we'll wrap up the conversation with this. Now, what are a few questions you would ask, specific questions to check and test whether the candidate is the right fit for your team and your organization? So maybe 2 or 3 questions that you would ask in an FP&A interview to somebody who's joining as an FP&A analyst.
Yeah, so it's interesting. One of my good friends, his name's Andy Hull, like he's a CFO right now, and he always used to say, look, I'm going to give somebody a scenario, right? Let's say I'll take a brand for a given company and say, hey, this brand is doing really well. It's been struggling lately. What questions would you ask as an FP&A person in order to help turn around the business? And right away, you get a good sense of what the person is, knowledge or thinking is. So even if they haven't got the practical experience, are they going to say, hey, I'm going to look at the top line and the bottom line of the business. I'm going to interview my stakeholders. I'm going to study the P&L. I'm going to look at the cash flow. I'm going to look at the balance sheet, right? So again, a simple question like that, you don't even have to have a formal case. I mean, if you have time, maybe have them do a case. But if you don't, that ability to study the P&L. So let's say it's a public company. I used to always study the annual report of the company to say, hey, what is the last quarterly result? And then when I'd go in, I'd be able to intelligently ask questions about, hey, I noticed you guys took a dip in earnings in the last quarter. Any concerns from you as an FP&A leader? I would ask that question as an interviewee. So for me, as a person asking the interview question, it's easy. Just put it on the table for, like, if I asked you that question, your answer to that is very telling to say, how much knowledge do you have? How much thinking do you have? What is your process? Because FP&A people, it's about solving problems, right? It's about saying, hey, how can I explain the business results really clearly? How can I look at the forecast and ask the right question? So again, that becomes a really interesting way to do it.
So asking scenario-based questions and then understanding how. And during that conversation, do they bring out the right points that they have worked while they were doing the research?
Yeah, and the more senior the position, obviously the expectation goes higher and higher, right? So this is a co-op student coming out of an accounting program. It's the first one, of course. I mean, it's not going to be as focused on that answer, but if it's an FP&A manager or director, okay, I will require that they know how to look at a P&L and have the thinking to say, how do we turn things around? How do we grow the business? How do we understand it? So scenario-based questions are always helpful.
Awesome. So I think that was my last question from the list. Are there any last comments, thoughts that you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'd say for me, like, I love what you're doing because, accounting to FP&A is an interesting transition. And what I loved about it is I became much closer to the business, right? I felt like I was involved in the business, but there was an intimidating factor there, right? To be able to work with marketing, sales, supply chain, be at the forefront rather than the comfort of my own cubicle. It's just like anything else. You jump out of your comfort zone, you can grow, but it takes that investment, the time, and also be patient with yourself. So if you're an accounting person moving to FP&A, don't put too much pressure on yourself. Just every day, try and learn a little bit. And I really think that's rewarding. And I also say, look, if you go to FP&A and it's too chaotic, too much playing in the gray, there's nothing wrong with saying, look, I prefer staying in an accounting role because those roles are super, super important as well. So I just say, know yourself and say, for me, it was FP&A. I loved it. I think Asif, you the same, but I know many other people, like, I love doing tax or audit accounting. So just be yourself is my final advice. It's great to experience it and then see if that gives you joy. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if somebody wants to reach out to you from this conversation, what would be the best way? Would it be LinkedIn or how can they reach out to you? What would be the best way to reach out to you? Yeah, no, I think LinkedIn's a great avenue to contact me, and I'm always happy to talk to anyone. And I love seeing people get more joy out of their finance or FP&A roles, right? I think it's something that we should all strive towards. I'm striving towards it. Yeah, so LinkedIn's perfect.
All right. Thank you so much. And we'll put your LinkedIn profile so that people can reach out just in case they want to reach out. Thank you. And I hope we meet again soon. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, thanks, Asif. Keep doing what you're doing.